Hello, and welcome to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight we turn our attention to the quiet, unassuming world beneath our feet. Imagine a vast, empty office building in the heart of a great American city, late in the year 1925. The clatter of typewriters and the ringing of telephones have long since faded, replaced by a profound silence, punctuated only by the distant hum of the city. In this cavernous space of marble and polished wood, a lone figure moves with a steady, rhythmic pace. We hear only the gentle shh of sodden fibers across the floor, followed by the soft thump of the mop handle against the baseboard. The tool in his hands is heavy, crude, a tangled mass of graying cotton yarn held in a rusty iron clamp. It seems an object of permanence, as timeless as the labor itself. But this simple tool was, in its own way, the subject of a slow, deliberate, and almost entirely unnoticed technological revolution. To truly understand the quiet evolution of cleanliness in the modern era, we must trace the subtle, almost invisible journey of the industrial mophead, from its composition to its connection. The story of the standardized industrial mophead in the early 20th century is not one of dramatic invention, but of gradual refinement, driven by the changing architecture and economic realities of a growing nation. Before the 1920s, the concept of a standard mop was nebulous. Cleaning was often a hyper-localized affair, with tools that were either rudimentary rags on sticks or a chaotic assortment of patented but not widely adopted contraptions. The early patents of figures like Jacob Howe in 1837 and Thomas W. Stewart in 1893 had introduced the idea of a clamp-based head, a significant step away from simply nailing fabric to a pole. But these were far from universal. The true impetus for standardization came with the buildings themselves. The first decades of the 20th century saw the rise of the skyscraper, the sprawling factory floor, the modern hospital, and the consolidated public school. These were structures of unprecedented scale, with vast expanses of hard surface flooring, terrazzo, marble, linoleum, and polished concrete that required constant maintenance. A single custodian or a small cleaning crew was now responsible for tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands, of square feet. Efficiency was no longer a matter of personal diligence, but of economic necessity. The tools had to evolve to meet the sheer scale of the task. And the heart of the wet mopping system was, and would remain, the mop head itself. In the 1920s, the dominant material for an industrial mop head was, unequivocally, cotton. But it was not the pristine, uniform cotton one might imagine from a bolt of new fabric. The primary source for mop yarn was the textile industry itself, specifically its waste products. This was a critical economic driver. Cotton mills in New England and the burgeoning textile centers of the American South produced enormous quantities of mill ends, roving, and slasher yarns. Roving yarn, for instance, is a thick, loosely twisted strand of cotton fibers that has been carded and combed, but has not yet undergone the final spinning process to become a tight, strong thread. Slasher yarn consists of the leftover lengths of yarn from the large beams used to prepare the warp threads for a loom. These waste materials were ideal for mop production for two simple reasons. They were highly absorbent, and they were incredibly cheap. A mop manufacturer could purchase this byproduct by the bale for a fraction of the cost of finished yarn. The resulting mop heads were heavy, held a great deal of water, and were effective at scrubbing and lifting dirt. However, these early cotton mop heads were beset by a series of inherent and persistent problems. The first issue was linting. Because the yarns were often made from shorter staple cotton fibers and were not tightly spun, they had a tendency to shed. A new mop head would leave a trail of fine lint on the floor, which was particularly noticeable on dark-colored surfaces. This often meant a floor had to be swept or dusted again after mopping, a clear operational inefficiency. The second, and more significant, issue was durability and hygiene. Cotton, being a natural cellulose fiber, is an ideal environment for the growth of mold and mildew when left damp. The dense, heavy heads of the 1920s took a very long time to dry. A custodian finishing a shift would rinse the mop head in a slop sink and hang it in a dimly lit utility closet. Day after day, the mop head would remain perpetually damp, developing a distinctive musty odor. This was not merely an aesthetic issue. the mildew would slowly degrade the cotton fibers, causing them to rot and break down. A typical industrial cotton mop head of this era had a relatively short lifespan, becoming a tangled, discolored, and less effective tool after only a few weeks of heavy use. The composition of these mops was generally unscientific. Mop heads were categorized not by fiber blend, but simply by weight, typically in ounces. A 16-ounce mop, a 24-ounce mop, or a heavy-duty 32-ounce mop were common designations. The weight was the primary indicator of its liquid-holding capacity and, by extension, the area it could cover before needing to be returned to the bucket. The yarn itself was almost always a natural, off-white color, which quickly turned a permanent shade of grey-brown with use. There was little thought given to specialized applications. The same type of mop head would be used on a factory floor, as in a hospital corridor or a school cafeteria. Paired with this rudimentary yarn composition were the attachment mechanisms of the day. The goal was to securely fasten this heavy, wet bundle of yarn to a wooden handle, but to do so in a way that allowed for its eventual replacement. The most common design of the 1920s and early 1930s was the jaw-style or clamp-style holder. These were typically made of heavy cast iron or, in cheaper versions, stamped steel. A typical jaw-style mechanism consisted of two metal plates, often serrated on the inside to improve their grip, which were hinged at one end. The mop head of this period featured a simple, narrow headband, a strip of heavy canvas or duck cloth through which all the yarn loops were stitched. The user would have to loosen a compression mechanism, most often a large wing nut on a long screw that passed through both plates. With the wing nut loosened, the jaws could be pried apart. The canvas headband of the mop was then carefully laid between the plates, and the wing nut was laboriously tightened by hand until the jaws bit into the headband, holding the mop head in place through sheer pressure. This design was functional, but deeply inefficient. Changing a mop head was a time-consuming and often frustrating task. The wing nuts could be difficult to turn, especially with wet or cold hands. If over-tightened, the screw threads could be stripped. If not tightened enough, the heavy, waterlogged mop head could slip out of the holder during use, a common and vexing occurrence. Furthermore, the materials themselves presented problems. The cast iron or untreated steel of the clamps was highly susceptible to rust. In the perpetually wet environment of mopping, these holders would quickly corrode. The rust could stain floors, and the corrosion would eventually seize the tightening screw, making it nearly impossible to change the mop head without the use of tools like pliers or a wrench, if it could be changed at all. The entire process was a bottleneck in the workflow of a cleaning crew. Thus, the state-of-the-art in 1930 was a heavy, lint-prone, slow-drying cotton mop head that was prone to rot, attached to a heavy, rust-prone, and difficult-to-operate metal clamp. It was a purely utilitarian object, born of thrift and tradition, but it was not an optimized tool. The pressures of a modernizing economy, however, would soon begin to exert a slow, inexorable force for change. The 1930s, despite the economic turmoil of the Great Depression, was a period of quiet, incremental improvement in the world of industrial cleaning supplies. Manufacturers, competing for contracts with large institutions that were themselves desperate to cut operating costs, began to address the most obvious flaws in their products. In the realm of yarn composition, the focus remained on cotton, but with a greater attention to quality and construction. Mop producers began to more carefully source their raw materials, seeking out longer staple cotton waste, which was less prone to linting. The most significant advancement of this period was the widespread adoption of plied yarn. Instead of using single strands of thick, loose roving, manufacturers started twisting 2, 3, or most commonly 4 strands of yarn together to create a single, more robust cord. This 4-ply cotton yarn became a de facto standard for a quality industrial mop. The act of plying the yarn had multiple benefits. It dramatically increased the tensile strength of the individual strands, meaning the mop was less likely to snag and tear on rough surfaces. This directly translated to a longer service life. A plied yarn mop could withstand more aggressive scrubbing and would not degrade as quickly as its single-strand predecessor. It also helped to lock in the cotton fibers, which modestly reduced the persistent problem of linting. While the fundamental issues of slow drying and mildew remained, the simple act of plying the yarn made the cotton mop head a more durable and cost-effective consumable good. This was a detail that a discerning purchasing agent for a school district or hospital could understand and specify in a supply order. Simultaneously, the attachment mechanisms began to evolve away from the cumbersome jaw clamp. The driving force was the need for a quick change system. The time a custodian spent wrestling with a rusty wing nut was time they were not cleaning floors. The industry's solution, which became dominant in the late 1930s and into the 1940s, was the stirrup, or gate-style mop holder. This design represented a significant leap forward in ergonomics and efficiency. The holder consisted of a thick, U-shaped piece of metal wire, or a thin steel rod, which formed the stirrup. The mop head's canvas headband was simply slipped over this U-shaped frame. A hinged gate, another piece of metal, would then swing down and close over the open end of the stirrup, trapping the headband securely. This entire assembly was then attached to a locking collar that would be tightened onto the mop handle. The advantages were immediate and obvious. To change the mop head, a user simply had to loosen the collar, flip open the gate, slide the old mop head off, slide the new one on, close the gate, and retighten the collar. The entire process could take as little as 20 seconds, compared to the several minutes that might be required for a stubborn jaw clamp. There were no wing nuts to struggle with, and no plates to align. It was a simple, intuitive, and mechanically reliable system. Manufacturers also began to address the problem of rust. Instead of raw cast iron or steel, these new stirrup-style holders were typically made from galvanized steel. The process of galvanization, coating the steel with a protective layer of zinc, made the holders highly resistant to corrosion. A galvanized stirrup head could endure years of daily exposure to water and harsh cleaning chemicals without seizing up or leaving rust stains. These small, unglamorous improvements, plied yarn and galvanized gate-style holders, represented the first major wave of deliberate engineering in the industrial mop industry. They created a more durable, reliable, and efficient system that saved time and money, the two key metrics in the world of commercial maintenance. The Second World War would serve as an unexpected and powerful catalyst for the next phase of the mop head's evolution. The war effort spurred unprecedented innovation in material science. The frantic search for alternatives to natural resources like rubber and silk led to a massive expansion in the research and production of synthetic and semi-synthetic fibers. Materials that were once laboratory curiosities were now being produced on an industrial scale. When the war ended, these new materials, and the factories that made them, were looking for new consumer and industrial markets. The humble mop head was about to enter the synthetic age. The first of these new fibers to make a significant impact on the mop industry was rayon. Rayon is technically a semi-synthetic, as it is derived from a natural source, typically wood pulp or other forms of cellulose. The cellulose is dissolved in a chemical solution and then extruded through tiny holes to form filaments, which can be spun into yarn. The most common form, viscose rayon, shared many properties with cotton. It was highly absorbent, in some cases even more so than cotton, and it felt soft to the touch. However, rayon offered several distinct advantages. It could be engineered to have a more consistent filament length than natural cotton, which helped to reduce linting. More importantly, rayon had a much faster release. This refers to its ability to give up the liquid it holds when wrung out. A mop head containing rayon could be wrung out more thoroughly and with less effort in a standard mop wringer, resulting in a drier mop for the floor. A drier mop meant less water left behind, which in turn meant faster drying times for the floor surface. A key safety and efficiency consideration in high-traffic commercial spaces, pure rayon mop heads were not without their drawbacks. Viscose rayon has a tendency to lose a significant amount of its tensile strength when wet, meaning a 100% rayon mop could be less durable than a cotton one under heavy scrubbing. The solution, which would define the mop industry for the next several decades, was the blend. By the late 1940s and into the 1950s, manufacturers began to offer mop heads made from a blend of cotton and rayon fibers. A typical cotton-rayon blend might contain anywhere from 20 to 50% rayon. This combination sought to capture the best qualities of both materials. The cotton provided bulk, scrubbing power, and familiar absorbency. The rayon contributed to a faster liquid release, quicker drying of the mop head itself, and a reduction in lint. This simple blend was a notable improvement. It addressed the age-old problem of the perpetually damp, mildewed mop head. A cotton-rayon blend mop, when rinsed and hung to dry, would be ready for service much sooner than its all-cotton counterpart, and was less prone to souring and degradation. This post-war era saw the solidification of the gate-style attachment as the industry standard. The designs were refined, with better locking collars and stronger, lighter-gauge steel. The wooden mop handle, a constant for centuries, also began to see competition from materials like aluminum, though wood remained the most common and cost-effective option for many years. The system of a blend yarn mop head on a galvanized quick-change holder became the workhorse of the American commercial cleaning industry. It was a reliable, efficient, and increasingly sophisticated system, yet the most significant material innovations were still to come. The 1960s ushered in an era of unprecedented prosperity and a boom in commercial construction. Office parks, shopping malls, and sprawling hospital complexes became common features of the American landscape. The cleaning industry professionalized alongside this growth, with large contract cleaning companies emerging that managed maintenance for multiple buildings. For these companies, which purchased supplies in massive quantities, the total cost of ownership, including the purchase price, the lifespan of the product, and the labor required to use it, was a critical calculation. This economic pressure drove the next great leap in mop head composition, the introduction of true synthetic fibers like nylon and polyester. Nylon, a product of DuPont's research in the 1930s, was renowned for its exceptional strength, durability, and abrasion resistance. It was also highly resistant to chemicals and was not susceptible to mold or mildew. On the surface, it seemed like an ideal fiber for a mop. However, it had one critical flaw: it was not very absorbent. Nylon is a hydrophobic fiber, meaning it tends to repel water rather than absorb it. A pure nylon mop would be useless for soaking up spills or applying cleaning solutions. Polyester, another synthetic polymer that became widely available after the war, shared many of nylon's characteristics. It was strong, durable, chemical-resistant, and mildew-proof, but also lacked absorbency. The solution, once again, was blending. Manufacturers began to create complex, multi-fiber mop yarns, each component chosen for a specific purpose. A state-of-the-art mop head from the mid-1960s might feature a four-way blend, for example, 40% cotton. For its high absorbency, bulk, and scrubbing texture, it remained the core component for picking up and holding water. 30% rayon, to improve absorbency while providing a much faster liquid release in the wringer, leading to faster drying floors. 20% polyester, for durability and structural integrity. The polyester fibers acted as a reinforcing skeleton within the yarn, preventing the cotton and rayon from breaking down as quickly. It also significantly reduced linting. 10% nylon, added almost exclusively for its abrasive quality. The stiff nylon fibers provided extra scrubbing power to remove scuff marks and ground-in dirt without scratching the floor finish. These engineered blends were a world away from the simple cotton waste mops of the 1920s. They were marketed under proprietary brand names that promised superior performance, longer life, and lower lint. This era also saw the introduction of a key structural feature, the tailband. Early mop heads were cut-end mops, meaning the yarn loops were cut at the bottom, creating a fringe. This design was prone to severe tangling and unraveling, and it offered uneven coverage on the floor. The looped-end mop, where the yarn formed a continuous loop from the headband down and back up again, was a significant improvement that had become common in the post-war years. The tailband took this one step further. It was a narrow band of fabric or mesh sewn across the looped-end yarns, about a third of the way up from the bottom. This tailband kept the yarn strands in a flat, wide, fan-like shape during use. It prevented tangling, ensured that the mop covered a wider area with each pass, and allowed all the yarn to make contact with the floor, a looped-end, tail-banded, multi-fiber blend mop head was a highly efficient and durable cleaning tool. This new level of durability, offered by the synthetic content, enabled another revolutionary change in practice: launderability. For the first time, mop heads could be designed to withstand the rigors of industrial washing machines and dryers. An all-cotton mop would fall apart after just a few cycles in a high-temperature wash, but a blend rich in polyester and nylon could be laundered dozens of times. This had profound implications for hygiene and cost. A cleaning crew could now use a fresh, clean mop head for each shift, or even for specific areas within a building. At the end of the day, all the used mop heads would be thrown into a washing machine with detergent and bleach, emerging sanitized and ready for the next day. This was a critical development for institutions like hospitals, where preventing cross-contamination was paramount. While the initial purchase price of a launderable blend mop was higher than a simple cotton one, its dramatically longer lifespan and the hygiene benefits it offered made it far more cost-effective in the long run. The ability to launder mop heads also directly led to the development of color-coding systems. Because synthetic fibers hold dye much more readily and permanently than cotton, manufacturers could produce mop heads in a variety of bright, consistent colors. Cleaning protocols were developed where specific colors were assigned to specific areas to prevent the spread of germs. For example, blue mop heads were designated for general-purpose cleaning in low-risk areas like offices and hallways. Green mop heads were used in food service areas like kitchens and cafeterias. Red mop heads were reserved for high-risk areas, such as restrooms, to isolate bathroom bacteria from the rest of the facility. This simple, visual system was a major step forward in public health and professional cleaning practice, and it was made possible entirely by the evolution of the yarn composition within the mop head. As the yarns became more sophisticated through the 1960s and into the 1970s, so too did the attachment mechanisms. The reliable galvanized steel gate-style holder, which had reigned for nearly 30 years, began to face competition from designs that utilized another modern material, plastic. The 1970s was the great age of injection-molded plastics. Materials like polypropylene and high-density polyethylene were strong, lightweight, impervious to rust, and could be molded into complex shapes with great precision. This led to the development of the next generation of quick-change mop holders, often referred to as break-frame, breakaway, or snap-on styles. These new holders radically simplified the mop-changing process. A typical design featured a lightweight plastic or, for greater rigidity, fiberglass handle with a wide, flat plastic head assembly at the end. The mop heads designed to work with these systems co-evolved. They moved away from the traditional narrow, 1-inch canvas headband to a much wider 5-inch headband, typically made of a durable, non-woven synthetic material like polyester or vinyl. The changing process was a study in ergonomic efficiency. The user would lay the flat, wide-banded mop head on the floor. They would then place the plastic frame of the handle over the headband and simply push down. A clever locking mechanism would automatically snap shut, gripping the headband firmly. The entire attachment process took less than 5 seconds and required no bending down or manual manipulation of gates or collars. To release the dirty mop head, the user would simply step on a lever or press a button on the plastic head with their foot, and the frame would spring open, dropping the mop head directly into a laundry bag or waste receptacle. The user's hands never had to touch the wet, soiled mop. This was a significant improvement in both speed and sanitation. These plastic and fiberglass systems offered numerous advantages over their metal predecessors. They were significantly lighter, reducing user fatigue over a long shift. They were completely rust-proof, eliminating any chance of corrosion or staining. They were also non-conductive, an important safety feature when cleaning around electrical equipment. Finally, they were often color-coded to match the new color-coded mop heads, creating a fully integrated system for managing cleaning protocols. A hospital might have red handles that were used only with red mop heads in its restroom cleaning carts, ensuring the system was followed correctly. By 1980, the industrial mop system had been transformed. The standard tool was no longer a crude bundle of cotton waste in a rusty iron clamp. It was now a highly engineered system. The mop head was a carefully formulated blend of natural and synthetic fibers, with a looped end and tailband construction for maximum efficiency and launderability. It featured a wide, durable synthetic headband that was color-coded for a specific use. This mop head was attached to a lightweight, ergonomic fiberglass handle via a quick-release plastic snap-on mechanism. The journey from 1920 to 1980 was a quiet one, unmarked by famous inventors or dramatic press conferences. It was a slow, steady process of problem-solving and refinement, unfolding in the workshops of cleaning supply manufacturers and on the floors of countless anonymous buildings. Each small change, applied yarn, a galvanized coating, a percentage point of rayon in a blend, a plastic lever, contributed to a larger narrative of increasing efficiency, improved hygiene, and greater worker productivity. It was a subtle evolution, driven by the simple, ceaseless demand for a cleaner, safer, and more orderly world. The rhythmic shush and thump of the custodian's mop remained, but the tool that made the sound was a testament to 6 decades of silent, practical, and profoundly boring innovation. The standardization that took place was not one of government mandate, but of market consensus, a convergence of design principles that best answered the needs of an ever-expanding built environment. The mop head, in its final 1980 form, was a perfected tool for its time, a synthesis of material science and ergonomic design, ready to clean the floors of a world on the cusp of a new technological age. Its story is a reminder that progress is not always found in the grand gesture, but often in the patient improvement of the tools we use every day.